I just want to start the interview more or less tracking back some 25 years when you got involved as what the Americans would call a gopher. When you first started with the Patrick Troughton story, the Space Pirates. Going back, what would, in regards to the atmosphere, when you worked in that story, how did you find the production team in that story in comparison to the one when Barry Letts was producer with the Ambassadors of Death, which was your second one? And what elements did you take from that when you became producer back about 13 years ago?
Well, when I first worked on the show, it was in the role of floor assistant, the most junior member of the production team. Basically a kind of glorified call boy, main responsibilities being getting the actors on the set at the right time. And at the very first show I worked on was with Patrick Troughton as the Doctor, and subsequently two other stories with John Pertwee as the Doctor. Now, the thing about the role of the floor assistant is that basically you're working on the floor, you don't have headphones, you don't hear what's going on upstairs, you're only aware of what's going on the studio floor. And certainly it seemed to me that what was going on the studio floor was very much more fun on the Patrick Troughton show. There was a tremendous atmosphere of naughty schoolboys almost, with the late Pat Troughton and Fraser Hines and Wendy Padbury, all goofing around the whole time, being serious when it counted, of course, for the last major rehearsals and the final take, but a tremendous amount of fun. Now, that's not to say that when it came to working on the Pertwee shows they weren't fun. They were just not as funny. I think perhaps the technicalities of the show undoubtedly had become greater. The show had moved over into colour, which required a greater kind of concentration in terms of those particular areas. So that's my chief memory of the differences is one of Pat's era, which, was towards the end of black and white in Doctor Who, being a real laugh, and John's era being a little more serious in its approach from upstairs.
Taking that knowledge, when the BBC gave you the producer's post in 1979, you had already proved yourself very well as a production unit manager with All Creatures, Great and Small, and with Doctor Who under Graham Williams, I believe, who passed away recently. Did you know what you were going to do from the start, or were you kind of surprised about the new responsibilities that were taking shape with the Tom Baker stories coming to America, the big surgence in American fandom, and in regards to the fan consciousness in America?
I think if you're kind of hoping that something will happen, like you're hoping that you're going to be offered the opportunity to take over a show like Doctor Who as producer, I think you tend very much to have very, very tentative plans indeed, because I think the whole time perhaps you're expecting disappointment and the fact that it's not going to happen. So I had made only a few initial kind of thoughts as to what I would do if I was to be offered the mantle of responsibility after Graham Williams. It wasn't really until I actually took over the job that I really sat down seriously to kind of appraise what I actually wanted to do. I think it was a case of, tempting fate too much if I'd got an enormous list before I had actually got the job.
With hindsight being 20/20, considering what's happened over the past 10 years, recalling what Pat Troughton had told Peter Davison before he took on the role of the Doctor, to do it not more than 3 years. Considering what had happened with the 18 months break, Colin Baker not being permitted to renew his contract, and eventually the cancellation after season 26, would you probably have thought about convincing Peter Davison to stay on for a fourth year?
Well, I did attempt to persuade Peter to stay on after he'd completed 3 years. I think the decision that the optimum period for a Doctor being 3 years is one that has been made subsequently to Peter's time. I think everybody at the BBC, myself, the head of drama, and perhaps even the controller of BBC One, wanted Peter to stay on, and I did attempt indeed to persuade him to do so. If that had happened, I think those questions are extremely difficult to answer. What if? One thing I know is that I really wish that I had moved on earlier, because I feel to some extent, although every actor who plays the part gets labelled to a certain degree by the fact that they played the leading role in the world's longest-running science fiction series, I think as the producer of the show for 11 years, it's really labelled me rather more than I would like, because I don't see my future being totally concerned with science fiction. I actually see my career having a much broader kind of canvas, really. So I think in terms of people moving on, maybe I should have gone a little earlier.
Well, look on the bright side. At least if you want to come to the States, you always have a place to stay.
Well, yes, there is that. Yes, there is that indeed. Yes.
Colin Baker is one still for conversation. The current joke running that all of his episodes could probably fit half a season with the way Doctor Who was being made in the 60s. Knowing that you're firm in your decision by picking him, considering all that happened with his show, and considering that, at least from the official story, that the show was taken off for a year and a half because of the excessive violence during his first full season, can you say that you've had some desires to change the violence factor in his first year, looking back at it?
Well, I think I have to kind of pick you up there and say that I don't think it's ever been said it was taken off for 18 months because it was too violent. I think the real reason it was taken off it was basically because they needed a sufficient amount of money to require the cancellation of many, many shows. Doctor Who was just one of them, in order to achieve daytime television, which then was quite a novelty for the United Kingdom, on the BBC. And it was an attempt to suddenly demand this money because the BBC wished to pull forward their launch date because the independent companies were pulling forward theirs. So there was this sudden and dramatic attempt at cancelling a whole range of shows and using the money for the daytime television. So that was the reason, or certainly the reason I was always given, as to why it was rested. Now, as for Colin's contribution, I actually think he got a tremendously raw deal, in that he did one season, then there was the hiatus, then we came back, and when we came back we were only 14 episodes, and I think they were in a slightly longer format. And then it was decided that, that we should move on and have a new Doctor. I actually think that Colin never really was allowed to get his teeth into the part. I think perhaps most people would agree with me that the first season of virtually every Doctor is really a very tentative one, the actor trying desperately to find the way to play the part, which after all is very, very thinly sketched as a part, and coming to terms with the amount of themselves that's required to be injected into the portrayal. So I really feel that Colin, maybe, if there hadn't been that hiatus, would have got straight into a slightly higher gear that would have, given him the opportunity to mature his role. And, as I said, consequently, I feel he had rather a raw deal.
For the record, from this interviewer's point of view, I think Colin gave his best, and I not to be biased, but I agree with you in certain respects. He did, pardon my French, get screwed, and he did very well with the resources that he could have. And considering from what I understood, you mentioned daytime television. That wouldn't probably suggest that Doctor Who was just put off a bit to make way for EastEnders, would it?
It wasn't put off a bit to make way for what?
EastEnders.
No, I don't think we were put off to make way for EastEnders. EastEnders, or the twice-weekly soap opera, had been on the cards for several years. I think that where Doctor Who got involved with EastEnders initially was the fact that after we were moved from our traditional Saturday evening slot to a twice-weekly slot, each year we were on different days. One year would be Monday, Wednesday, another year would be Monday, Tuesday, and so on. And apart from doubling our audience during this time, which was a significant indication that those early evening drama slots could work,